Good day, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar about privileged access management. My name is Hendrik de Bruin, and I look after the cybersecurity product portfolio here at NetCV. I also have Kobus Burgers, our Managing Director online. From BeyondTrust side, I have Mark, who will be doing a presentation about BeyondTrust, and Paulo will be doing a demonstration. And over the last couple of years, we have found more and more customers expressing concerns about privileged access management and not being able to prove accountability when things do go wrong. From a security perspective, it's a well-known fact that most problems occur due to human error and excessive privileges. With BeyondTrust, we hope to address those concerns for our customers. Please note, the presentation will be distributed after this webinar, and the video will be available from our website, www.netcv.com. Feel free to post any questions using the chat feature as we go along. And thank you very much. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So my name is Mark Bykes. I'm the Regional Sales Manager for BeyondTrust. And today, I'd like to say thank you for joining us for this presentation on Universal Privilege Management. In order to, I think, give you a little bit of context on who we are as a company and what our solution set is before seeing the demo, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to tell you about how BeyondTrust got formed into the company that it actually is. There's a lot of relevance in understanding what took place for us as a company in the last 2 to 3 years in how we came to be the BeyondTrust organization that we are. And because it also speaks about the problem that we see in the market that we're trying to resolve. And it also gives an indication as to why our product sets are built out in the way that it currently is. So this presentation should take 10 to 15 minutes. And then I will hand over to my colleague, Paulo, who's going to be giving you the demo on the actual BeyondTrust platform. So let's start with who is BeyondTrust. So as an organization, BeyondTrust, if you trace back to about 2 years ago, we were actually 4 separate companies, and that was represented by the gray blocks. On the slide here, those companies was Bomgar, Vector, BeyondTrust, and Lieberman Software. Now, what we wanted to do as an organization, and at that point, you know, this was the view of our of the owners of these organizations, is they realized that in the market, customers were really dealing with a very fast-moving and complex problem in terms of being able to manage the explosion of privileged credentials that they were encountering within their environments. And I think that the realization was that traditional PAM tool sets were being kind of, I think, outgrown or was not just really up to the task of managing that fast-moving environment, that fast-moving situation. And so BeyondTrust was formed by consolidating 4 market-leading organizations into forming, and they basically formed the BeyondTrust that you see in the center of the screen. And this formation of organizations was tempered by a view from the market analyst, a prominent market analyst called Gartner, who basically took a view on PAM at that point in time. And, you know, PAM being an approach toward managing your privileged credentials and placing all of those privileged credentials into a vault. Their view on PAM and what is required from a PAM perspective says that this problem extends beyond just your traditional PAM, and it extends into managing the actual access and managing the actual endpoint. So if you look at the view of the analyst that says, if you are to address the explosion in privileges and credentials across the enterprise today, you need to have a solution set that, one, gives you the ability to manage privileged credentials into a vault, but also have the ability to manage the actual access and how people are using those privileged credentials, and manage the endpoints as well. That should also recognize that there are current tools within an environment. So integration, or I would say interoperability, is a very, very important point, as well as ease of deployment. And ease of deployment goes without saying, because the situation is moving as fast as it currently is. It is of little use to a customer to be stuck within a deployment project 6 months or 12 months after making an investment into a PAM solution set. So ease of deployment means being able to get it in and get it to a point where the customer can realize the value in very, very quick time. And so the BeyondTrust solution set was actually formed with this particular view in mind, that says our ideal solution, which we refer to as UPM, Universal Privilege Management, actually starts with privilege password management component, which is the ability to discover all of the privilege credentials within an environment and assist customers to bring all of that under control, and then extend into the endpoint privilege management, allowing us the ability to manage endpoints, whether they are Unix, Linux, servers, Windows, Mac, desktops, and even as far as network devices. And then lastly, to deal with that growing challenge that we see in the marketplace today, which is managing the access, whether that access is the access that's taking place within internal users and whether that is external users that are accessing within an environment, and all built on a platform that allows you to pull all of your analytics and your forensics from that you would need within an environment. And then giving customers the choice of deploying those solutions either on-premise, into cloud, into hybrid, and even as far as managing any assets that are on-premise and in cloud or in a hybrid state within an environment. And now I want to introduce you to the platform that BeyondTrust has built out. And as I said to you, we are calling this Universal Privilege Management, which essentially is about the ability to manage the explosion of privileges that are happening throughout an environment today. And so from our perspective, we're seeing this as a new era, an era of universal privilege management. And like I said, today's challenge is about managing the explosion of privileges across the actual enterprise. And it's about shrinking the windows of exposure, and this window is growing ever more through on-premise environments, through cloud and hybrid. A lot of organizations are leveraging processes and advancements like DevOps, and this is causing the attack surface to grow. And so there is a need to be able to bring all of this under control through universal privilege management. And so this is a problem that is very, very hard to do when the sheer amount of users is growing rapidly. I think the one thing that we have seen with COVID and the associated lockdown is that a lot of organizations now have to cater for a lot of external third parties that legitimately need to access into an environment. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what these external entities, whether they are vendors, whether they are contractors, there's a lot of uncertainty about how these organizations are accessing into the environment and what they are actually doing within those environments. So this is a growing problem at the moment. Also, when you start thinking about actual internal users, there are privileged users internally, there are help desk users internally, and then there's also this growing amount of non-human entities. So non-human entities that's tied to actual APIs within environments and processes that are leveraging DevOps processes. All of these entities are requiring access into an environment legitimately. And so how do you bring all of that under control? And so what we are seeing, and if you look at this, I mean, there's a lot of stats around that are speaking to this right now, but without reading them off individually, if we are doing a good job about managing the privileges, managing the access, and managing the endpoints, then we are doing a very, very good job to manage all of these points here. Because if you think about just the last point, 88% of critical Microsoft vulnerabilities could be mitigated by removing admin rights. If we are sufficiently controlling the endpoint, we are controlling what is happening in that space. And if we are managing all of the privileged credentials in an environment, we are doing a good job of managing the fact that 80% of breaches are involving a privileged credential of some sort. And so this is what has fueled the universal privilege management platform that BeyondTrust has brought to market. This is what gives us the ability to manage every session across an environment as it is today. And so now I'm going to be handing you over to my colleague, Paulo, who's going to give you a demonstration on the BeyondTrust platform. Paulo, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Mark, could you just stop skipping? Okay,
sure.
There we go. Thank you. Hopefully my screens come up. Everybody can see that.
Yes, I can see.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paulo Andre. I'm one of the solution architects for BeyondTrust. Working very closely with Mark and Charis in the Africa region. And obviously, we're just going to be doing a demo on our product. So first of all, in terms of the demo, I'm going to do a lot of references to administrators. And administrators within the context of the demo is the PAM administrators as such. And then we'll talk about the end users. And the end users are obviously the users that need to connect to specific asset systems, whatever terminology you're using to identify those specific entities that you need to connect to. Now, those end users in their own right can be administrators, but in the context of the demo, if I talk about administrators, it's strictly the PAM administrators. Now, we've obviously, BeyondTrust, as Mark's mentioned, has been around for quite some time, and we've done quite a few projects within the region. And the one thing that we've noticed is the more changes we are introducing to users, the more difficult it is to have successful projects. So that said, whatever client your users are using at this point in time. So for example, I've got a remote desktop manager. I could be using Putty, the likes of RDP, any client that you're currently using, be it proprietary or some other third-party client, we can integrate with all of them. And we can introduce our security controls to those specific environments when you're connecting to them, which is quite important. This allows the user to feel, for one, he's still using the same tools he was before, even though you are introducing the security controls, but they're comfortable with how they connect to their assets, and they're comfortable on how they work with their systems. Now, you'll realize that within the BeyondTrust world, we talk a lot about assets. We are an asset-based organization in terms of licensing. We tend to encourage our customers to look at licensing per asset. And the reasons behind that is, in an ideal world, you just want one administrator going into an asset. But it's not practical. And in the security world, it doesn't make sense. Ideally, when you're looking at enterprise environments, lots of assets, lots of administrators, you're going to have a lot of personas, a lot of users connecting to those environments. And you want to have multiple administrators. It seems like it's more difficult to control, but in the real world, when we enforce in PAM, it's much easier to have roles that are connecting to assets. And thereafter, once you've got the roles and you've done your session management and your privilege management, and you start looking at least privilege, because it's a path we all take within PAM. We're going to start with the sessions, and we're going to move to least privilege. And once you move to that least privilege and you've got the different administrators, it's much easier to enforce those controls. You can imagine if all your users are logging onto one asset with one account, when you start going the least privilege route, you're going to struggle to identify those separate roles and be able to enforce least privilege. So that said, if I'm going to connect to an asset now, and I'm going to just show you a connection, we talk a lot about workflows. And the workflows is the process of authentication and authorization that happens when we're establishing the session. So just off the cuff here, I'm going to open up a session to one of my server assets. And it's a standard network user. So net user 02, which is a standard network user on the network. In his workflow, he needs to approve himself to get onto that specific system. And he wants to elevate to a user called app user. He's going to put in his own credentials. We're obviously using self-signed certificates. But you'll see that within the session, we've presented our proxy. solution, and we've identified to the user that there needs to be an approval as such. Now, the administrator would get a notification, be it via his mobile device or his email client, that there's an approval that needs to take place, and he would log into BeyondInsight, which is our platform, as Mark has mentioned before. Now, the first thing that we do here is we do full role-based access within our platform, meaning that a PAM administrator can manage certain amount of assets and certain feature sets of those assets. In my demo, I've just got one administrator. He's going to look at password safe, which is our session and password management utility, look at the sessions that he needs to approve as he receives that notification. And once those sessions get populated, he would then be able to approve that via the management console. So we're just waiting for that session to populate. If he has to drill into it, he would see the requesting user, the specific user that that user wants to be elevated to, and which system or which asset he's going to log on to. And you'll see that we've got a predefined time for this asset of giving access for 2 hours. I'm just doing a demo, going to approve the session. And in the background, once the policy is being authorized, those credentials are going to be injected into the session. So you're going to have the user logging onto the system as such, as you can see. But even though he has been logged on and he's got his RDP session onto the system and he's been logged in as app user, he doesn't need to know app user's credentials. If they aren't exposed to him, it just reduces the risk within the organization. Now, what we can do in the background, for example, is once that session's been established, we obviously are starting to record the session, record metadata. We're making sure that when that session ends, we've got the capabilities to change the password. And by doing that, we can enforce principles like just-in-time principles, where those credentials are only available for that specific session, which in this case was 2 hours. And we've got the capabilities to automatically do that in the backend. Now, the user as such would carry on working on his session. He might get into various environments, just clear up that session there. But if he had to go within the session and start typing in simple commands and running that within the environment, we've got the capability, he's got the capability to do his work. Now, this workflow obviously was around starting up the sessions, making sure that he's got access as such. From a Unix perspective, we've got the same look and feel. The way we're connecting, I'm just going to minimize this, the way we're connecting, and we've got different workflows to present. So on the Windows side, we had a workflow where we're enforcing the manager that needs to approve the session. So your 4i principle. Within this context, I'm going to start a new session. And now this is going to be to a Linux environment. Quickly log in with those credentials. It's still net user. But now within this workflow, he needs to present an OTP. And you'll see that it's asking for approval OTP, so your multi-factor authentication. We know that it's net user 01, so I'm just going to quickly copy that across, put it into the session, and he's going to authenticate against Google. And that's timed out. Let me just quickly check that. As demos would have it, they tend to sometimes go wrong. I just want to quickly test that again. Unfortunately, the Google OTPs are time-based, and if there's a delay in the session, slow down the process there. Let's just get this Google authentication code. We're going to try and authenticate that. So normally what I find with these rules, what seems to be the problem is that my Linux server that I use to do the auth has probably lost its time. And I'm going to quickly just do an update there, get the time up and running. If you've had experience with multi-factor, you will know that it's very time dependent. And if I've got an offset on time, most likely is that the clock of the virtualized server has been set off by 700 milliseconds. And I'll quickly close that session off. And we're going to just try this again. My apologies. This code's going to quickly change. Let's get a new one. And hopefully this time round, we'll authenticate that and it won't go through. Okay. So I'll leave the multi-factor authentication for now. Obviously, we're going to need to troubleshoot that at the back end. It worked about 27 minutes ago. I'll just bring up another session that hasn't got multi-factor in the workflow. So it's just your standard user having to log in. And we again have the issues. Okay. So while the system is rebooting, I'm running everything on VMware. Sometimes we lose access to the interfaces on the virtualized systems. I'm just going to carry on with the demo in terms of other products or other connectivities that we've got. So when we're connecting from the client side, your remote desktop manager or your PuTTY authentication sessions, what is actually happening there is we got the direct connect methodology. So we've got a client that's making a direct connection to those assets and bringing up those sessions like we saw with the remote desktop, which is still running. Now, what we do offer as well is, besides the fact that we can use the clients, we've got the capabilities to bring in what we call a web console. Now, part of a lot of questions that we get from customers is, how do we provision third parties coming in? You know, they've got the third parties. These third parties have got credentials to our vendor equipment. We sometimes need them to support their equipment. How do we provision those? How do we allow the users to log in? Now, the web console would give you the capabilities to provision either your AD-driven accounts or local accounts within the BeyondTrust solution stack. So as an example, if you've got Cisco equipment and you find that Cisco needs to come on board, they've probably got a VPN at this point in time, and you drop them off, and thereafter you might have other security mechanisms and still allow them onto your Cisco equipment to go and do their support that they need to. You could quite easily create a local account for your Cisco entity. You create that account, you've got a credential, and as that user would log into the system, and let's, for example, say you did have a Cisco account, but as he would log onto the system, he would be presented with our web console, as we call it, and he would be presented with the assets that he's got connectivity to. Now, just to highlight the Cisco example, that Cisco engineer could log in and he would see multiple devices that's been provisioned for him to be able to support them. Now, we've got a few capabilities here. So the first thing that we've got is we've got a one-click launch. It gives you, it's called one-click. It gives you capabilities to start those sessions very quickly. Now, the next item that we got to display is that we could tie that into an ITSM. So if you're running the likes of ServiceNow, Jira, maybe CA, you've got the capabilities to integrate with those third-party solutions to basically stipulate if a user needs to log into a specific asset, and in this example, we're talking around the Cisco environment, if there's an open ticket for it, and it's within this time period, we're going to approve that access automatically. So if I had a ServiceNow instance, I would put in my ticket number and I'd be able to open the session. Again, you'd see that this ticketing system is set up as optional, and this follows, again, the workflows of how we can connect into those assets. So for specific users, I could stipulate, I want those users to go through my ticketing system, and if they haven't got a valid ticket, they're not going to be connected, which obviously you can enforce for third parties. Alternatively, this user's got access, and he can just go right ahead and open a session in my world. We've also got capabilities to do PAM the old way of doing things, which was, let's retrieve a password, let's showcase the password, being able to copy it, and then you inject it manually. But again, that introduces risk. You are allowing the user to see the password, it gets exposed, and obviously that increases the risk within the organization. So I'm going to go quickly to my one-click, select to open the session, bearing in mind that the user is already authenticated when he logs onto a web access, and just as the session opens up, we'll inject the credentials and the user's got access onto the Cisco environment. We're on there now, we can run the Cisco command and he's got the capability to see those. So at this point in time, we've got the two sessions running. We've got a Windows session, we've got a Cisco environment. I'm going to give my Linux a bash again, and hopefully if the demo gods are in my favor, this would work. So I'm going to quickly just authenticate the user. And again, it's just to highlight different workflows within those environments. And that's why I'm opening the multiple sessions. Just want to quickly copy that OTP. Go back to the sessions, see if we authenticate. Okay, we got a problem that I'll have to review after the session. But as it stands, we've got currently got a RDP session, and we've got a SSH session running to Cisco environment. From an administrator's perspective, this is from a PAM administrator's perspective, we've got the capabilities to look at what we call active sessions. So what are the current active sessions within Password Safe? We're going to go look at those active sessions, and these are real live sessions that are happening right now. Now, the first thing that the administrators got, and bearing in mind we've got role-based access, which means you could have multiple PAM administrators that would have a group of assets, or perhaps a department, or perhaps a business unit that he moderates or he looks after, and he can obviously approve those accesses, set up the access accordingly. We've got the capabilities to have those multiple administrators and have full role-based access within our platform. So now, as the user opens this up, he's got the capabilities to go look at those live sessions. So I'm just going to quickly open up this session as it starts updating. And if I have to go open up the RDP session, every action that the user does, the administrator can see live and basically see what the user is getting up to. Now, should this user start performing any tasks that we deem is a risk to the organization, the administrator's got the capability to lock the session. He'll lock the session. The user will see that there's it's been locked. There's a splash screen. Please contact your administrator. They have a discussion around the incident, and they decide to unlock the session. Now, the first thing that you've got as a capability is that we just blocked the input and output onto the session, which means that should this user have been updating software, perhaps installing an application, a new application, maybe he's doing a backup, SQL query, any of these tasks that are time consuming, and he suddenly decided, listen, I'm going to go and look at what's the latest movies out. You've got the capabilities to just stop that session to make sure that you're reducing risk, talk to the end user that's trying to connect, and try and get that resolved. Bearing in mind that the administrator has got all the metadata. So if we're looking at the session where I typed in clear and test, all the metadata is available. You can see that he opened the PowerShell window, he clicked on Start Applications. So you've got the capabilities to see not only what's happening in real time, but what has happened within the session previously, so that you can make your decision, do I lock or terminate the session? So as I'm talking about terminate, we've got two other capabilities. So we've highlighted the lock. The terminating the session would kill the session, but bearing in mind, we've given access or approved access for 2 hours, so the user would be able to reconnect. So you might use a terminate should the session hang as such, or there's been something wrong with the terminal. You could terminate a terminal and allow the user to create another session. Or you could go ahead and terminate and cancel the access that you had given for that 2-hour period. So I'm just going to minimize that. And if we had to go to a Unix, Linux type of environment, so where you're looking at going over SSH, and in my world, I've got my Cisco session, I've got the same capabilities to lock that. You would see that the session's been locked. Please contact your administrator. Depending on what client you use, it would show you differently. Obviously, the user can type in those, but if you had to go and lock that again, you would see that the user's got the capabilities to carry on with that session. And it just follows the same principles that we had earlier. So I just quit out of that quickly, and this will very shortly update that. Now, the web console gives you the capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, to allow for the third parties. It also allows for staff to connect if they haven't got the predefined clients configured for all their access. So you can imagine if one of your administrators suddenly gets a new laptop and he hasn't got the latest clients being deployed, he's got the capabilities to use the web console to connect. Now, those administrators might not just need sessions, they might need other capabilities. For example, they might need to do some applications, run some applications with admin rights, but in their own right, they haven't got a full admin session. So normally, if you've got your, for example, your Active Directory administrator, and he logs into the server, you might be enforcing least privilege via groups. And groups, although it's got its own place within the Microsoft ecosystem, its concept of least privilege is very limited. you're only basically able to give somebody full admin rights or not. But you haven't got the capabilities to stipulate, listen, you've got admin rights to run certain applications. Now, the products that we're showcasing at this point in time is strictly only password and session management. It means that we haven't got an agent installed at the target asset. So we haven't touched the system you're going to land on. We are just strictly providing an interface for the user to connect. So that said, without that agent on the target system, if we want to enforce least privilege and just allow certain applications, we've got very limited capabilities because there's no agent sitting on an asset. What we can do is we can, what we call do remote applications, so single applications. And for example, if this administrator wanted to change Active Directory users and computers, you could just start this remote session, start up the application via RDP, and very quickly, he would get the application that he needs with the correct access to be able to make those changes. The session itself has got nothing else in the back end, but he's got the capabilities now to go and make the changes that he needs on Active Directory. He's got the correct rights, but he can't go and change interfaces or be able to stop the IIS server, maybe restart the SQL server, because that doesn't fall within his user role. So he'd work on those applications. When he'd finished, he'd be able to close them. We've also got the capabilities to touch websites, be it homegrown applications, web-based applications that are cloud platforms. We've got the capabilities to also allow you to manage those. So another example would be your Amazon console login. A very good use case would be your Amazon console for the organization would be, it could be an asset that's very valuable to the organization. You're starting up instances, shutting them down. You've got the capabilities to roll out multiple servers for the organization. And with that, we want to make sure that the users that are logging in there, because those are privileged accounts, that we can manage them accordingly. Now, within this process, we're going to start the application, inject the credentials that the user needs to log onto that cloud platform. You would see that I tested this just before I came online. I'm just going to quickly shut it down and start it up again. But you want to make sure that when the user is connecting, that that application gets injected with the credentials. You don't want the user to have your Amazon logins, because what happens if that user, if that user suddenly would go ahead and leave the organization, you'd have to make sure that you follow the processes to remove his credentials from Amazon and that your environment secure. By pushing that via your PAM solution, what you would have available would be that everything's controlled from Active Directory. As soon as the user's left the organization, his Active Directory account's been removed. All these other access to all your other corporate cloud applications, any other third-party solution that you're having would then be controlled via that environment, which is very important. I'm having a bad day on this side. So that application for some reason hasn't started. You might have users that need to use, work on SQL as well. And again, these are applications that we go ahead and inject the credentials into. Hopefully this will work out as well. So if the user needs to work on SQL, he'd be logged into those environments. He'd automatically be given access to his databases as such. Bearing in mind, we are just allowing him to elevate as a user. And if you had to go here, you'd see the account that he's going to log in as. So for SQL, he's logging in as an account called PAM_SQL. He'd be able to log into those environments and be presented with an application alone. So these are just your remote applications. If you had to minimize them, you see that there's nothing else that the user could actually work on there, which is quite important. So you've got the limitations of least privilege being enforced on those environments. Now, from the console perspective, your administrator's got the capabilities to obviously go in, as I showcased, to see the live sessions. We've also got the capabilities to go and see recorded sessions. So if you had to go to replay, you've got all your sessions available for the environment. You could go and choose where the user has typed in a command called test and get all those sessions with those as such. If we're looking at various sessions here, and I'm just going to get them via size, Let's just quickly go look for those. You'll see that this is quite a large session. Let me just reduce it even further. And there we go. We've got quite some large sessions available there. What I do want to highlight in this session is that this session basically ran for 39 hours. Okay. And even though it's run for so long, we've only consumed just over 1,000 kilobytes of data to record it. What I'm trying to highlight here is that we are just taking a snapshot of every time there's a change within that session. So if I could open up the session and play it back, you'll see there's only been 39 events. But as I play that session, we've recorded for 79 hours, but we've consumed very little data. So we've got the capabilities to take snapshots of images and play it back to you as a time lapse, so that you would see the entire 79-hour session, if that's what the user is going to have open. But again, we're not using a lot of data. You can jump to specific events if you needed to within the session, and those would come up. You've got the capabilities to go ahead and take a snapshot of the specific event. So we have to pause it, take a snapshot. I would be able to present it as a JPEG to management if there's been a risk within the organization, or if they need to troubleshoot some sessions that have happened. You've got the capabilities to add a comment. So demo viewed session. And you've got the capabilities to save those. All that information gets saved within our database, so that at a later stage, your multiple administrators can come in here, view these sessions if they've got the correct rights. We've also got the capabilities within these sessions to provide a user from, for example, your risk department, the capability to just view sessions, but not grant access or stand up policies for your PAM environment. And that again ties back to the role-based access within the platform as such. In terms of the recorded sessions, you've obviously got the capabilities to go and filter those accordingly. You could be choosing for specific accounts, when sessions started, ended. I showcased the keystroke where we can look for specific commands, and we've got the capabilities to go and source through those. Now, when we're going back to the platform, obviously, when we're talking about the assets, they need to be added onto the platform. So the first capability that we've got within this is to do full discovery. Now, it's one of our strong points within our solution that as you buy the product set, you're going to get the capabilities to do those scans. At this point in time, you're limited to obviously 3 different scans. It could be either the discovery scan, a detailed scan, or an advanced discovery scan. Now, those scans will give you various types of information. We can, if I could go move forward now, we could scan specific targets, IP ranges. Once we set those up, and I'm just going to set up an example, but if you had to go set up, I just want to scan the one IP, you could again choose to either do a credential type of scan, you'd use those on advanced, or you're going to basically just do a scan that doesn't look at credentials, so it's doing the port scan and identifying the specific assets. As we had to move forward, you would choose which agent, and the agent would be your scanning agent. So in large corporate environments, you could have multiple appliances scattered across the globe, and you could choose which of those would be able to touch those assets and could be used. And that just gives us the capabilities to scale our solution accordingly. If I could go choose one and move forward, thereafter I would stipulate, when does this job run? Is it a one-time? Does it run immediately? Do you want to schedule this for the future? And you can have those run periodically as need be. Now, just going back here, I'm just going to discard the changes. When we are scanning those assets, and I'm going to look at app 01, which is one of the servers we connected to. If you had to do a standard scan, you're just going to get the standard details, right? Which is your FTDN, IP address, what's the workgroup it belongs to, what's the operating system, and your asset name. And that's your basic scan when we're doing discoveries. Thereafter, you would have the capabilities to do an advanced scan. And the advanced scan would allow you to get obviously further details. There we will take credentials, we'll deep dive into the OS, enumerate ourselves and get a lot more information out. For example, the certificates that are installed in the system. This is a Windows environment. We had a scenario earlier this year during the COVID period where a lot of the CAs that had software in the Microsoft operating system, that their CAs expired. And you'd actually see that via this view, we can see those CAs that have expired. And if we scroll up and down here, some of them are pretty old. Microsoft obviously hasn't cleaned that specific image or that specific release, but you can see that there were certificates for AdTrust that expired 30th of May, for example. And if you haven't done your updates, you wouldn't get the new CAs and you'd lose connectivity based on those certificates. So you've got the capabilities to look at those expired certificates and reporting them. We can pick up the full hardware that the system is running on, which is obviously beneficial to the organization. I'll explain a little bit later how and why we can use this information for your benefits. We've got a full list of ports, processes, scheduled tasks, standard information. Importantly, on the Microsoft platform is that we've got the services and what accounts it's running at. So if you're looking at managing service accounts, and you might say, listen, Paulo, we're going to pick up the service account, but when I rotate those credentials, how do I know that you're stopping the services, restarting the services accordingly, and you're doing a proper rotation of credentials and services? By us discovering your assets and understanding the services, we can link that account to a specific system and what service it's running on that system. And then as we rotate those credentials, we can go restart that service accordingly. We've got the capabilities to find those shares, identify all the software, not just the software name, but the version number, and who's the vendor that signed that software, which is, again, this is critical information. I'll show you a use case around that quickly. And then obviously the users, and this is the important PAN information. Is it a privileged user? How many days hasn't he rotated those credentials of his? When last has he logged in? Has the password expired? And all that information gets captured. Now, as we schedule these scans periodically, and that could be weekly, monthly within the organization, and you could have multiple schedules to cover all your assets in scope, you're going to keep updating this information as it enters the system. Now, from our perspective, where this makes a huge difference is we've got what we call smart rules. And smart rules gives us the capability to virtually group assets so that we can manage them within the PAM solution. Now, it's very simple for us to go and say, listen, I want to go and find all my Linux servers. And if I go look at the details of this rule, very straightforward rule to say, listen, these are my Linux servers. I'm looking for an operating system that contains Linux, and I want to group it accordingly. I'm going to show the asset as a smart group. Very simple rule. I find all my Linux servers. If I go back to my assets and I had to go and look for my Linux servers, I would have them all grouped together. Very simple rule, makes sense, easy for me then to dictate which user roles can log into those specific assets. What you can use the information for, and where we offer some value that other vendors within the PAM space don't, is I can go and create a smart rule to say, listen, I know that my organization's got SQL running. We've got some SQL servers, and I know that we run version 2012. Now, within this, I'm going to give access to my databases to the DBAs so that they can work on it. But I'm going to make sure that not only am I giving them access to the databases and the servers, but it's going to be the correct version that I've approved for the organization. So I can then stipulate the rule here. Listen, go look at the installed software. And I'm going to just say, listen, make sure that the installed software contains SQL. And you can use that regex to identify those specific applications. Thereafter, I'm going to add another condition to say, besides the installed software, I want to go look at the version, the software version. And based on that, I'm going to say, make sure that the software version contains 2012. And by playing with these criteria, we can go and match that to specific versions that the organization is running. Thereafter, I can take action, go grant access, allow the users to log into their environment. And this is quite a powerful use case. So when you're looking at compliance and enforcing it, not just from a regulation point of view, but compliance within the organization, you can enforce that your DBAs are connecting to your servers that you know that are running your correct versions. And if a rogue server had to come online, they wouldn't be able to access it accordingly, which is quite powerful. I could again then go choose to say, listen, I'm going to look at SQL, but I'm going to look at all the rogue servers that exist. Now, you duplicate the rule. Now, instead of does not contain 2012, and now my next action around this would be, listen, let's send out an alert. So now, as soon as the wrong version of SQL gets detected on your network, you've got the capabilities for one, to make sure that your users aren't connecting to it. And for two, you can take some proactive steps and alert somebody to say, listen, somebody stood up an incorrect version of SQL, let's take some action. So it's a nice feature set that you can consume and use. Now, within our space, if we're still looking at the assets and the kind of information that we're getting out of it, and out the box, we've got over 200 reports that are built into Beyond Insight. And if I had to look at the assets, I've got the capabilities to look at asset delta information. For example, what software has been added, removed to the environment, bearing in mind that we're running periodical scans. Now, where this becomes relevant, and again, a very powerful use case, you've got a server that's been compromised, and you know, you're going to start doing your troubleshooting, understanding where did the access come from? You know, how did the users get onto that system? What was the attack vector that, you know, bypassed my security controls and allowed people in? Now, with this, as soon as, if I'm running BeyondTrust and solution stack and I've been compromised, one of my first port of calls would be, listen, go do a software delta report on a specific asset. And for the last 30 days, I want to see what software has been installed, what software has been removed, what changes have been made to that system. Very quickly, I can go look and see, has somebody perhaps installed a new backdoor, a new version? If that hasn't been the case, then you can at least write off those attack vectors and start looking somewhere else. Maybe then start looking at the sessions. Has somebody duplicated sessions? So you've got the capabilities to do that and get that information out of the system. Should, for example, if you are in the financial sector or you in a specific sector that's relevant to your organization, and you're running specific software and a new version's been, or a new vulnerability's come out for that version, you've got the capabilities to go and report on that software. Go look at all your assets that the hacker's got, the latest Adobe Acrobat that's got a 0-day that's going to affect your organization. Report on who's got that software and take action if you haven't got other mechanisms to do that. Now, part of our reporting on our side is that we've got what we call, we've got what we call Clarity, which is our artificial engine. And one of the things that I mentioned is, let's say you have been breached within your organization, you're running BeyondTrust, you can go look at where there've been password releases that are concurrent. And what Clarity is looking at doing is looking for abnormal behavior on the system. So if a user logs onto a Linux server and they keep opening one or two sessions simultaneously, concurrent sessions, and it's something that they've done periodically, it won't get triggered by this request. But if suddenly you've got a user that's never opened a secondary session to an asset, and suddenly 3 months down the line it starts doing that, it will be triggered by Clarity, and you'll be able to then go and view this. So it's got the capabilities to pick abnormal behavior and then obviously report on it. And depending on which products of ours that you've got running, you could start picking up malware when an application has been launched for the first time. Is the application vulnerable? Untrusted applications, the first time a user's consumed the password or he's used the password. And yes, you know, this might get triggered a lot initially, but as your system's been running for a few months, those triggers would get triggered much less. And if they do get triggered, you could take proactive steps to understand, is it a user that's using the system correctly? Has it been configured correctly? Bearing in mind that you're leveraging off Active Directory, so it hasn't been put into the wrong group, for example. And you've got the capabilities to report on that. You could find untrusted users, we've mentioned or touched on concurrent, and then you could look at unusual password releases. You know, those are password requests. Perhaps he's never asked a request after hours at 10, 12 at night, and suddenly he's done that. That would be an unusual password release request that you could look at. So you've got the capabilities to report on those. As I mentioned, we've got over 200 reports out the box, but you've got the capabilities to go look at your regulations. So, if you're running or you're enforcing specific regulations, you've got the capabilities to go and report against them. Again, this helps with your compliance to understand where have I enforced the proper principles within configurations, understanding that if you're looking at our endpoint privilege management solutions, you could go look at, are your agents or are your desktops compliant to specific requirements that you've got available. So moving off the reporting side, or I just actually want to touch on one other one. In terms of assets, we've got obviously Power Broker password safe, and we've got the capabilities to go and report on managed versus unmanaged accounts. Now, what's quite important is when we do discoveries, we're finding all the accounts on the specific asset. So you can go and draw a report of the managed versus unmanaged and being able to show the risk department, listen, I've got 12 accounts on my Unix Linux system. I'm managing 5 of them, but according to the report, you can see that the other 7 accounts haven't logged in the last year. So you've got the capability to draw up a very quick report that will show management that you're managing your assets correctly. In terms of, and I see we're running short on time, so I'm going to try and speed it up. In terms of the solution, I've highlighted most of the functionality. What I do just want to touch on very quickly is the type of systems that we manage, which is quite important. So when we're looking at asset types, we've got a lot of platforms built out the box, and we've got the connectors to identify those platforms and obviously interact with them accordingly. In terms of databases, again, a lot of connectors out the box for those to manage those accordingly. And if there are new ones, we've got the capabilities to build what we call platforms, your own platforms on our system, which is quite important. So you don't have to engage with professional services to go and onboard a specific platform that we haven't got a connector for. You can do it yourself. We share the documentation on how to do that, and you can go ahead and build those accordingly. In terms of directories, we obviously support the standards Active Directory and LDAP. And in terms of cloud, we've got quite a few cloud connectors built out the box. So when I was looking at Amazon, even though my connection didn't come up there, we've got the capabilities to interact with those cloud platforms and manage the accounts on them. So if the API allows for it, we can go and change those credentials. And you can see that by looking at my managed accounts. For example, I've got app admins an account I tried to use earlier. I could go and test the password to see, is that password working correctly? Yes, it is. And then I could choose to go and change the password. Very simple. The password will be scheduled to be changed. You could go take multiple accounts and say, listen, I want to go and rotate those credentials quickly and choose to change them. I could go look at app admin and say, listen, what's the password history on that account? You'll see that you can show the password. This was a forced reset I did on the 19th. And I could go see that password. You can look at the complexity. We can obviously enforce the complexity per asset. So we've got policies for passwords. And you will see that you cannot see the current password. And this ties back to the RBAC implementation that we got on Beyond Insight, that even an administrator cannot go and see the password. He hasn't got the capabilities. He would have to go follow the same route as the users in terms of going to password safe, looking at specific accounts and requesting access accordingly. So Mark, from our side, I'm pretty much finished with password safe in the demo. I'm been looking at the questions and answers. There haven't been any questions that have come up. So from the audience's perspective, I don't know if there's any questions that people would like to pose, something that we could perhaps look at and talk around.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paolo and Mark. Yes, I don't see any questions. So
I have a quick question.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
From a ticketing system, do you also support Zendesk?
So I could quickly have a look at that for you. So as I mentioned, we've got a lot of connectors out the box, and those connectors would obviously connect to multiple systems. I can just go and quickly see if we've got Zen. You mentioned it's Zendesk. So at this point now, I can't see if we've got a connector built into this version of it. But if Zendesk has got the capabilities to consume an API, then we would be able to write some of that. I know a lot of the third parties, if we haven't got a built-in connector, there hasn't been enough requests for integration, we can assist with writing a module that will talk to the API and be able to share that information. It shouldn't be an issue.
So I'm sure that using a post or a GET request to the API should facilitate that for us.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Oh, great. In that case, thank you very much, Mark and Paulo, for a very informative session.
No problem at all, Hendrik. It was our pleasure.
That's great. As I mentioned at the beginning, the presentation itself will be shared to email, and a recording of this actual demonstration and presentation will be available on our website, www.netcb.com. Thank you very much for attending, and look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Just before everyone go, if you need any dedicated demonstration or a more in-depth demonstration, you're welcome to contact any of us. You will have our contact details based on the list of contacts that registered when we share the presentation. Most of you have registered based on the invitation you've received from me, so you can just reply on that invitation if you have any specific requests, and I will make sure that we get in contact with you, or even do a proof of concept or proof of value if your organization wants to have a look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cobus. But just from a BeyondTrust perspective, just like as Cobus says, we're very open to doing a individual demo to your organization. We are also open to doing evals as well for our solution. And even if you just want to have a conversation with our team, or a conversation with any of our references, we do have references for the solution in South Africa. So please just contact either myself or Cobus or Hendrik, and we'll try to assist you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.